Oftentimes my prayer life, what I take to the Lord inside of my prayer closet, what I come to the Lord and I plead with Him, is answers to my questions. I mean, don't get me wrong, there's nuances and there's requests and there's things like that, but really at the core of what I'm asking is a question, and I'm asking the Lord to answer it. My encounters with the Lord then are based off of a question answer relationship. I ask a question and I expect an answer from Him. And that's not inappropriate. But at the same time, I'm a dad of four. And each of my kids has gone through this phase. And my youngest is currently in this phase where our relationship is based off of question and answers. And oh my goodness, that can be exhausting. I mean, even just this morning, right before I was literally like 30 minutes ago, before I was driving into here, and I was wrestling and thinking about this. My son, God love him, he just came up and he was so excited. He's an early morning riser. Me, not so much. So it's a challenge for me to be a good dad the moment that I step out of my bed. And my youngest, man, he is just peppering me with questions. Right now, what he's really into is Harry Potter. So he's reading stuff. He's like, Dad, he's like, what do you think will happen to Sirius Black? Hey, Dad, who do you think is the key person inside the Goblet of Fire? Hey, Dad, I was wondering if I could watch the movie and not read the book. Hey, Dad, and oh my gosh, question after question after question. And don't get me wrong, it's in those moments when I need to remember that that's what it means to be a dad, especially in the early stages of maturity. What it means to be a dad is to answer questions. What it means to be a dad is to be that gentle, patient guide. What it means to be a dad is it doesn't matter if you're a morning person or not. Questions will come, and your children are worth a response. So please don't hear me saying in this video, in this morning devotion, in this weekly wrestling, that you're not allowed to ask questions of God. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is whenever you're only asking questions and demanding responses, you actually miss the depths of what it means to be in a relationship with a God that by definition is a profound mystery. It was this morning whenever I got to the office and started reading Acts chapter 9, whenever I sat there and thought, oh my goodness, more than an answer to a question, what I really need is to be baffled by my Lord's presence. To be struck dumb. To be so overcome by His presence that bewilderment is my only response. In Acts chapter 9, this is whenever Saul, who will eventually become Paul, he is going after the church. Matter of fact, it says in the very first verse, Saul was still breathing out murderous threats against the Lord's disciples. In Acts chapter 7, it was the stoning of Stephen where we first saw Paul. In Acts chapter 8, he starts going after Christians. And now here in Acts chapter 9, the second half of verse 1 into verse 2, it says, Saul went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogues in Damascus, so that if he found any there who belonged to the way, whether men or women, he might take them as prisoners to Jerusalem. Saul was ramping up. He was intensifying his persecution against the church. And it says, verse 3, as he neared Damascus on his journey, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice say to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? He encounters a revelation of the Lord. In verse 5, Paul asks a very confused question. Who are you, Lord? Which makes no sense. Why would you call someone Lord if you don't know who they are? Paul is overcome by the presence of the Lord, and he's baffled. He's confused. He's pushed into bewilderment. And it says, the rest of verse 5, Jesus speaks. He says, I am Jesus whom you are persecuting. He replied, now get up and go into the city and you will be told what you must do. He's given a command. with very little clarification. I mean, there must have been a whole load of questions that came into, so what is I'm supposed to do? Whenever I go into the city, who is it that I'm supposed to engage? What's supposed to happen? But Saul doesn't ask questions. No, verse 7 says, the men traveling with Saul stood there speechless, bewildered, dumbfounded. They heard the sound but did not see anyone. Saul got up from the ground, and when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. He is baffled, even to the point of not being able to see. The irony is that spiritually, his actions towards the Christians demonstrated he was blind way before this moment of being struck dumb, of being baffled. Saul got up from the ground, but when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus, and for 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Saul was overcome with the presence of the Lord, to the point where he is not able to speak, and he is not able to eat or drink or even see. It reminds me of how Paul describes this incredible journey in 1 Corinthians chapter 12. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul talks about this very strange, 2 Corinthians 12. Paul talks about this very strange journey into this third heaven. And he goes into this, now he speaks as if it's someone else, but he goes into the presence of the Lord. He says in verse 2 of chapter 12 of 2 Corinthians, I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up to the third heaven. Whether it was in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows. He's baffled. And I know that this man, whether in the body or apart from the body, I do not know, but God knows, was caught up to paradise and heard inexpressible things. Things that no one is permitted to tell. Things that no one is able to tell. Why? Because a true encounter with God isn't merely a question-response game. It's a moment where we are baffled by the revelation of God's presence. Why am I making this distinction? I mean, I could go on how in Revelation chapter 1, whenever John sees Jesus on the island of Patmos, the resurrected Christ, he falls down at his feet as though dead. He's baffled by the presence. Why am I hammering on this? From Acts 9 to 2 Corinthians 12 to Revelation 1. Because my challenge for you this week is to not so much look for answers to your questions with the Lord, but to remember what it's like to be baffled by his presence, to pursue bewilderment, to descend into the profound mystery of who our God is. And in that space, be willing to be overcome with inexpressible things that you cannot speak to others because you yourself are baffled by what was spoken to you. And it is in this sacred space where not only a true maturing relationship with the Lord will begin to unfold, but where transformation will begin to explode. I love you guys. Have a good week.